finished another page. That's right, buckle up for page 3. The mysterious cries for help persist, but the shipwright seems determined to head in the opposite direction. Even the dimetrodons are attempting to move away from the sound. Things are coming together much faster now that I've loosened up and changed up my workflow to something more like ink. Now it will be a challenge not to go back and redraw the first 2 episodes. I won't. I'm sure I won't. No, that would be crazy. No, I think that leaving them as they are to show the development process will be better. That's what I'm telling myself. This episode started during the sunset. As the sun lowered, the light became more and more red to reflect the nearing presence of danger. The rest of this 8-page story will take place at night, so I'll be challenging myself to create visual variety throughout. I'll have moonlight, shadow, and fog at my disposal, so we'll see what can be done by leaning on those elements. Something emerges from the swamp. While this image plays itself out, I want to talk to you about Disney's brief moment in the sun. When I was younger, they released Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and Treasure Planet, 2 movies that completely captured my heart and imagination. At the time, it felt like some glitch or slip-up had led the biggest animation company in the world to accidentally make movies just for me. Adventure stories created by artistic titans. Of course, they weren't well advertised and didn't do great financially, and Disney slid back into safe, familiar territory. Over the last few years, it's been cool to see people come back around to these movies. They struck a chord in a lot of us. I think people yearn for stories like that because they just aren't being told these days. I certainly wasn't ready to move on, so I stubbornly made my own. Of course, I'm not a movie studio. I'm just a guy who draws. But you do what you can with what you have. In 2017, I started telling my own story, Tellurian, a project I'd been dreaming of creating since I was a kid. It's a visual adventure story based loosely on the armor of God from the book of Ephesians. For example, the protagonist is given the breastplate of righteousness. That means being made right with God. When he's later imprisoned, his captors try unsuccessfully to remove it. It can be hidden, obscured, but no one can take it away. There are several themes that I loved from those old Disney movies that I salvaged, like the impact a father figure can have in a young man's life. The idea that sometimes it's more important to be courageous than smart. Inheriting the ruins of your own civilization and taking up the mission to rebuild. The whole story is available for free on my website, link in description, and check it out. If you like it, you can pick up a copy for your bookshelf. I added over 30 pages of sketches and development material in there too to sweeten the deal. I bring up Tellurian fairly often, and it's not just because I like money. It was also the biggest thing I'd ever attempted. Before that story, the longest I'd ever spent on a project was 2 weeks. Tellurian took 3 years and 3 months to finish. It can be hard to trust independent projects these days. A lot of people are excited to start things. Finishing them is a different story. I found that you grow far more trying to finish the last 10% than the first 90% combined. I think it's important to remind you about Tellurian for the sake of building trust. It's physical proof that I can start a huge project and bring it home. Dead Gods is a huge project. But for me, it's round 2. I don't know when it will be done, but I'm thankful for everyone who's sticking around with me to find out. Now back to the comic. We've reached a point I've been looking forward to. We're going to start to see where the dragons of Dead Gods differ from most classic dinosaurs. In an early video in this series, I talked about the possibility of theropods having the ability to vocalize, similar to corvids. These birds have an incredible ability to mimic sounds.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
How are you?
How are you?
I know, right?
I know, right? I know.
Hi, Tuck. Hi, Tuck. Hi, Tuck. Hi, Tuck. Hello. 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 Good bird.
Who's a good bird?
Imagining that behavior coming from a raptor or T-Rex, I'm doing that. It's done. And with that, the 3rd page of episode 3 is complete, almost halfway. I'm hitting a good stride here. We'll see if I can have page 4 done next week. Now for the character design. Famine was supposed to be easy, but turned out to be the most challenging of the 4. The horsemen arrived in logical order. Each one is a consequence of the rider before him. Conquest leads to war and open conflict. Large-scale war grinds farming to a halt. That tees up famine. In Revelation 6 it reads, So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, 1 quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. War led to food scarcity, driving prices up. For the antediluvian version of famine, I thought of him as consequences. Antediluvian conquest represented the gods' tyranny over mankind. My version of war represented the war they waged against God's creation. Famine represents the consequences of that war. If you recall, that war had many fronts. The Watchers and Nephilim lured humanity into a multitude of traps. They offered the secrets of root cutting and plants, unlocking their psychedelic properties. They offered enchantments and spells. They offered the ability to upgrade their feeble forms by undergoing hybridization. They offered weapons of war and dangerous new technologies. They offered commerce in exchange for blood. This version of famine represents creation, starved of order. This is why I thought he'd be easy. I was picturing him being a mess of body horror elements resulting from all of these assaults against nature. But the more I sketched, the more I realized that wasn't the tone I want for the project. A while ago, I made a video about the consequences of vice in this world. I drew people that had been so consumed by alcohol, pharmakia, and cannibalism that they had lost their humanity. It was gross. Useful, but gross. A part of world building is finding the lines, crossing them, and then deciding to turn back. I want this world to include the shocking and horrifying, but there's a way I want to do it. It's true that if I aim for PG-13, the story will remain accessible to a wider audience. Think of Indiana Jones. There are mummies, dead bodies, melting bodies, living organs being removed. It's not a horror movie. By choosing this tone, I get the extra design challenge of obscuring some of the worst elements. I think this works to my advantage. By hiding the most horrific elements, the reader's mind gets to make things far worse than I could ever draw. So, without full-blown body horror abominations, I had to get a bit more intentional. I'll discuss the choices I made one by one. First is mount. Famine is a lesser giant riding a greater giant. The big giant is suffering in a number of ways. He attempted to undergo hybridization, but it went very, very wrong. It was likely a contaminated mixture. Life in the antediluvian world is challenging enough, but it's even harder as an abomination. To cope, he gave into a host of substances. One leg is perilously swollen. His pose is the result of consuming a mixture of herbs designed to weaken the bonds between spirit and body. I wanted the rider, representing famine, to be deathly thin. While he represents creation being starved of order, a part of that is literal starvation. As humanity falls to further and further depravity, the planting and harvesting just isn't getting done. He's suffering from a host of consequences as well. One of his arms is swollen. He's lost both his feet due to his collapsing systems. He's been driven to madness from overconsumption of Watcher-inspired elixirs. He should be done for, but the mercy of release has been denied him. Dark incantations have been hammered into his flesh, which are cruelly sustaining him. With his 3 right arms, a modification made for vanity and excess, he holds a staff powered by a clay battery. Electricity was one of the gifts of secret knowledge given to mankind by the Watchers. His multitude of arms, now carbonized, display the consequences of recklessly wielding powers beyond your comprehension. In the original text, famine is said to be holding scales. These were used to measure out the wheat that had become expensive through scarcity. Instead of a silver denarius, prehistoric famine offers a different exchange. He carries vessels of blood, shaped to resemble human bodies. It was the only currency he would accept in exchange for food, but now there's nothing left. The food has run out. He now rides flaunting a stockpile of liquid wealth. And there we have it. A famine not only of food, but of health, sanity, and nature. Creation starved of the Creator's intended order, the living embodiment of the consequences of the god's tyranny. This is becoming quite the daunting crew. So far, these have been a great opportunity to explore some of the outer edges of what the Nephilim might look like as the story progresses. Next week, I'll get to the horseman that I've been looking forward to the most. Death. Thanks for watching.